guys, tonight we wander down a path you didn't know you were walking. The ground beneath your feet is warm, marble dust, soft and whispering. You can feel it cling to your sandals, even though you don't remember putting any on. It's evening, eternal evening, in some version of Greece that never quite existed. The air smells like figs and salt. Somewhere in the distance, cicadas buzz with the persistence of myth. You step forward. There's no rush. The stones here are old enough to wait for you. Each one remembers something, a tragedy, a tantrum, a transformation. You might not know their names yet, but they know yours. You can hear them murmuring it beneath your breath. You've probably heard the great Greek myths, gods and warriors, heroes and conquests, golden apples and wooden horses. But tonight, we're not chasing the brave or the brawny. Tonight we follow the quiet women, those turned to beasts, not by nature but by narrative. You probably won't survive this if you were expecting clean justice, noble resolutions, or moral clarity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing that. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass beneath a crumbling archway. It doesn't lead anywhere in particular, just the rest of the story. You're alone, which is to say, you're in good company. The first woman waiting in the wings is already more myth than memory. Her name was Medusa, or at least that's what they called her once her hair started hissing. But before the snake crown, before the glare that turned men into statues and gave B-movie monsters their prototype, there was a girl, a mortal. Beautiful, of course. That's always the first curse in these stories. Beauty, the kind that turns gods' heads and ruins lives. She served in Athena's temple. You can picture her lighting incense, sweeping the marble steps, eyes lowered. Her hair wasn't serpents then, just hair, probably shiny, maybe braided, maybe not. The thing is, she was celibate by vow, part of the deal. When you sign up to be a priestess of the wisdom goddess, a vow of purity. That's what makes the next part so horrifyingly predictable. Poseidon, god of the sea, and king of the unwanted advances department, didn't care. He found her in the temple. And what happened next wasn't love. It wasn't passion. It was violence. In a sacred space. You don't need the details spelled out. They never are in the ancient texts. The phrasing is vague, passive, like the story's trying to back away from itself. But the result is clear. Medusa is punished. Not Poseidon. Athena, yes, the same goddess whose temple was defiled, responds not by condemning the sea god, but by transforming Medusa, hair into snakes, eyes into weapons, flesh into stone to anyone who dares look. It's the kind of divine logic that makes less sense the more you think about it. And you will think about it. That's the real curse. Historians still argue whether Athena's actions were vengeance or mercy. Some say she turned Medusa into a monster to give her power to protect her from future harm. Others say it was punishment, plain and brutal. A woman made monstrous so no man would ever touch her again. You walk a little further. The dust is thicker now. Statues rise on either side, figures, mid-run, mid-scream, mid-fall. The Garden of Medusa, they sometimes call it. But this wasn't her fault. She didn't choose any of it. And yet, she becomes the monster in every version. The one who must be slain. Eventually, a hero arrives. They always do. Perseus, golden boy with winged sandals and a mirrored shield. He doesn't look at her directly. He beheads her in her sleep. That's important. She wasn't fighting him. She wasn't hunting anyone. She was just asleep. From her severed neck, two things are born: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden sword, beauty and violence erupting from her death like poetry. That's the part no one ever remembers. That Medusa monster villain cautionary tale was also a mother, even if only symbolically. Her body birthed legends, and still all she gets is a bad haircut in Renaissance paintings. You reach a small alcove. There's a broken mirror there. It's not reflecting your face, only the stars above. You stare into it anyway. Somewhere in that glass, you think you see her, not the monster, not the stone-eyed killer, just a girl with braids and tired eyes. She doesn't say anything, but neither do you. The wind rustles through olive trees that were never really planted. You rest your hand on the column beside you. It's warm. Everything here is warm, as if lit by a fire just below the surface. You're not afraid, not yet, because this is only the beginning, and she wasn't the only one. You're still standing in front of that broken mirror, though time feels like it's slowed. Or maybe it's just the kind of stillness that comes when memory drapes itself over stone. You lean in a little closer, and the girl behind the glass blinks. Her reflection doesn't match your movement. She isn't copying you. She's watching you. And just like that, she's gone. You turn away and step back onto the path. The statues on either side are quiet now, and maybe you start to wonder who really decided Medusa was the villain here. Was it the poets, the priests, the painters? Or maybe it was just easier for the story to paint her as dangerous rather than devastated. Let's go back, further than they usually let you, long before the snakes. Medusa was one of three sisters, triplets of a kind if you believe Hesiod, the Gorgons. Only Medusa was mortal. That's right, her sisters, Steno and Euryale, were immortal from birth. She was the odd one out, the fragile one, the one who could bleed and age and die. There's something cruel about that, being born into a family of eternal beings and still having an expiration date. No one writes poems about Steno and Euryale. Their names barely make it past the margins. But the myths say they were there, grieving, roaring, wailing, when Medusa was slain. Some versions claim they tried to avenge her, chasing Perseus through the sky like mourning birds. Other versions erase their emotions entirely, just background monsters shrieking for dramatic effect. You walk into a darker chamber now. The statues change. These aren't the clean cuts of victims frozen mid-movement. These are snarling, writhing. They look less like people, more like something becoming something else. And you begin to understand maybe the monster wasn't Medusa at all. Maybe it was the transformation itself, the aftermath, the grief. In some versions, the sisters weren't monstrous at all until Medusa was cursed. Imagine that watching your sister be violated, cursed, hunted, and then turned into a warning, and then realizing you can't do anything to stop it, except become a warning too, except rage so loudly the world rewrites your face. Historians still argue whether the Gorgons were always terrifying or whether later writers, particularly the Romans, with their flair for drama, retrofitted them into horror tropes. You know how it goes. Hair like vipers, fangs like daggers, claws so sharp they could carve marble. But earlier depictions, they were different. Not always ugly, not always monstrous. Sometimes they had wings, sometimes serene expressions, sometimes just oddly protective stares. You reach a pool of water, shallow, moonlit. You kneel beside it expecting to see your reflection again. Instead, you see three women, two cradling a third. One hisses softly, her mouth trembling between scream and sob. The other strokes the fallen sister's brow, whispering words that ripple across the water but never reach your ears. The third just lies there, headless, still. It's Medusa again. But she's not alone anymore. The Gorgons were sisters, and they loved her. You don't see that in the stories passed around by candlelight. The myths are loud with violence and light on empathy. But what if they mourned? What if every roar, every clawed gesture, every stone-shattering screech was just a cry of grief too large for the human tongue? You sit down beside the pool. The water's cool against your skin, and the wind is picking up again, pulling in scents of myrrh and iron. Let's talk about those statues one more time. See, turning people into stone is a metaphor that never really dies. The idea of a woman so powerful, so dangerous, so emotionally wounded that one glance turns you to stone, that's not about magic. That's about fear. It's about society writing in bold italics, "Don't look too long at a woman's pain, or it'll ruin you." It was never about Medusa hunting men. It was about men looking at her and being unable to handle what they saw. You probably remember Perseus as a hero. He's got a constellation and everything, but he kills Medusa in her sleep. Doesn't that feel off? You're told she's the monster, and yet she doesn't attack him. She doesn't lure him. He sneaks in with divine gadgets and backhanded blessings and finishes her off without a fight. And even then, her body gifts the world with wonders. A winged horse, a warrior child, as if her power couldn't help but bloom, even in death. You leave the pool behind. The path begins to narrow, but you're not ready to leave this story yet. Neither are the echoes, because let's talk about that head. Perseus doesn't bury it, doesn't return it to her sisters. He carries it around like a trophy. He uses it as a weapon. He turns kings to stone with it, monsters, men, anyone who threatens him. The dead Medusa still serves, still protects, still fights, even when no one asked her to. Eventually, he gives it to Athena. Of course, the same goddess who punished her in the first place now mounts Medusa's head on her shield. The Aegis, they called it. A divine deterrent, a symbol of power. But whose power, exactly Athena's or the one she wronged? Historians still debate whether this was an act of redemption. Maybe Athena finally saw Medusa's worth. Maybe she honored her too late. Or maybe it was just another way to own the narrative, to wear a woman's suffering as armor. You pause under a laurel tree. The leaves rustle like soft applause. Somewhere an owl hoots, probably Athena's owl. The irony isn't lost on you. You begin to notice that the more you walk, the less clear the stories become. Facts blur. Myths contradict themselves. In one version, Medusa is born monstrous. In another, she's a victim made monstrous. In yet another, she's a misunderstood protector. What stays the same is this: her fate is never her own. And that's what makes it all feel so familiar. You look up. The sky is heavy with stars, scattered like spilled salt across black silk. Somewhere out there, the Gorgon sisters might still be roaring, not with rage, but with memory, with love, with the kind of grief that reshapes the world. You're not sure if the statues are closer now, or if the darkness is just playing tricks. But their expressions have changed. Some look afraid, others serene. One even looks like she's smiling. Maybe she understands what you're learning, that the line between monster and martyr is paper thin, and sometimes written by someone who never met you. You press your palm against one of the stone faces. It's cool, but not cold. Not cruel, just still, and you realize you're not afraid anymore. You keep walking deeper now, the air growing thicker with something you can't quite name. The statues are fewer here, but the silence is louder. There's a rhythm in it, like the breath between waves, or a heartbeat so ancient it's forgotten it ever belonged to a body. You round a bend, carved into the side of a cliff, and stop. There, at the edge of the world, or at least this world, is the sea. Not the bright turquoise postcard kind. This one is dark, endless, restless. The kind that swallows myths and burps up ruins centuries later. You can see a narrow inlet below, jagged rocks jutting up like broken teeth. The water crashes against them again and again as if trying to erase something that refuses to be forgotten. And there she is, Scylla, or what's left of her. She wasn't always a monster either, but of course you already suspected that by now. The pattern is beginning to hum beneath your feet. Once Scylla was a sea nymph, lovely, graceful, possibly shy, the kind who glided through coral reefs and combed kelp from her hair. She may have had friends. She may have had dreams. She may have wanted absolutely nothing to do with gods and their nonsense. But in Greece, being beautiful is often a prelude to being cursed. Enter Glaucus, a fisherman turned sea god with kelp in his beard and not nearly enough respect for boundaries. He fell in love with Scylla, obsessively, claimed he couldn't breathe without her, which is funny for a sea god, really. But she didn't return his affections. She hid. She avoided him. She said no, and that's when things got messy. Depending on the version you follow, and there are many, Glaucus, desperate and wounded, sought out the sorceress Circe to help win Scylla's love. Circe, of course, wasn't thrilled. She happened to fancy Glaucus herself, and when he asked her to whip up a love potion for another woman, she took it poorly. Historians still argue whether Circe acted out of jealousy or a twisted sense of justice. But one thing's agreed on: Circe brewed a potion, a cursed one, and poured it into the waters where Scylla bathed. You imagine her wading in ankle deep, maybe humming to herself, the sun warm on her skin, the sea foam curling around her toes. Maybe she closed her eyes. Maybe she was happy. And then she wasn't. The transformation is always described with clinical precision in the myths. Her lower half sprouted tentacles. Dog heads burst from her sides, 6 of them snarling and snapping. Her waist bloomed into a living mass of teeth and sinew. She grew fangs, claws gnarled limbs, where once there had been grace. She screamed, and the ocean echoed her scream for centuries. You're standing above that very bay now. The waves still churn the rocks, still glisten. No one builds shrines to Scylla here. No one brings offerings. She is remembered only as a monster, an obstacle on Odysseus's voyage, a danger, a thing to be avoided. But what if she just wanted to go home? The myths don't say where she went after, only that she remained, lurking, guarding her crag like a wounded animal. In some versions, she attacks ships out of rage. In others, she does it to feed the new mouths forced onto her body. You sit at the edge of the cliff now, legs dangling. The wind smells like salt and secrets and something else, grief maybe, or bitterness aged into something colder. You think about the sailors. They were warned about Scylla, told to steer clear, told to choose between her and Charybdis, another sea beast that wasn't exactly asked if she wanted to be terrifying. Odysseus chose Scylla, said it was better to lose a few men than risk the whole ship. So she killed 6, 1 for each of her heads, snatched them right off the deck screaming. But the myths don't say whether she enjoyed it. They don't ask what it's like to be made into a thing that can't stop killing, a body that devours because that's all it's allowed to do. You wonder, Did she recognize them? Did she hesitate? There's a fringe theory. You'll be amused to know that Scylla and Charybdis were once twin goddesses, guardians of the strait, punished for standing in the way of progress, trade, or something else entirely patriarchal. But that's not in the textbooks, that's in the whispers, in the margins. Still, the ocean doesn't forget, and neither does she. You look down again. The water crashes harder now, as if something below has stirred. The rocks seem to pulse. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe it's her. You whisper her name just once, just in case no one has in a while. Scylla. The air shivers, but nothing answers. Still, something in you feels seen. You stand and brush the dust from your hands. It clings to you anyway. Stories do that. As you turn away from the sea, you imagine her, still out there, beneath the waves, watching the stars. She can never touch again. Maybe she sings sometimes. Maybe she just sleeps. She didn't ask for fangs. She didn't ask for mouths that never close. She didn't ask to be remembered only by those she terrified. She asked to be left alone. You walk back into the dark, and the cliffs rise around you like teeth. You don't flinch. You know by now monsters don't live in the cliffs. They live in the edits. And she was edited. She was written into a problem solved with a sword. But you remember her now, and that's something. The cliffs cradle you now. You follow a winding stone path along their curve where the sea still moans behind you, like a lullaby sung by something ancient and sleepless. It's quieter inland, but only just. The air is thick with rosemary and the kind of silence that feels watched. You're not scared, just more aware that the world around you has been alive longer than anyone's stories have had time to lie. And up ahead, you see a faint orange glow. You follow it naturally, because that's what you do. When the myths go quiet, you chase the flickers. They always lead somewhere. This one leads to an island. No, not the kind from your vacation fantasy. It's wild, thorny, a little smoky. Something's cooking, but you can't quite tell if it's food or vengeance. This is Ayaya, the home of Circe. You probably know her by reputation. Witch, sorceress, man-hater, the one who turns sailors into pigs. Literally. But that's just the highlight reel. Tonight you get the long version, the quiet one. The version that unfolds beside a low burning fire with tea steeped in herbs no longer found on any map. She's waiting for you. No fanfare, no dramatic entrance. Just a woman sitting beside a cauldron barefoot, golden-eyed with salt-streaked hair, and the kind of posture that says, "I've been disappointed before." You sit across from her. She doesn't speak, not yet. She stirs. You watch. Let's rewind a bit. Circe was a daughter of the sun god Helios and the ocean nymph Perse. But don't let the divine lineage fool you. She was never quite at home on Olympus. Too soft for the sky gods, too thoughtful, too mortal adjacent. She had a voice that made people uncomfortable. She asked questions like, what happens after the transformation? And what if monsters have reasons? That kind of curiosity gets you exiled. So she's sent here, to Ayaya, not as punishment exactly, more like containment. They called it mercy. She called it quiet. And in that quiet, Circe begins to learn, not just herbs and potions, though, yes, she does become frighteningly good at both, but also how to read the wind, how to charm wolves, how to listen to the dirt beneath her bare feet and understand what it wants to grow. She learns how to protect herself, because she knows no one else will. That's the part they leave out in the epics. See, the men who wash up on Circe's island don't come looking for guidance. They come for conquest, for rest, for entertainment. She welcomes them, feeds them, listens. And when they try to take to claim to own, she turns them into pigs, not out of spite, out of pattern recognition. Historians still argue whether Circe's transformations were symbolic or literal. Was she calling out the animal nature of men who arrive entitled? Or was she actually using ancient pharmacology to warp their forms? The answer, as usual, is probably both. Her potions were real. So was her rage. But what no one tells you is she turned them back, always, after a time. Once they learned, once they stopped snarling and started looking her in the eye. Even Odysseus, especially Odysseus. You might remember him, our favorite crafty wanderer, sailing home from Troy with more ego than crew. He lands on Ayaya with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. His men get turned to swine naturally, and he, warned by Hermes, resists her spells, sword drawn, ready to play hero. But Circe doesn't fight him, she feeds him. They talk, they sleep together, they don't kill each other. And for a full year, Odysseus stays, not imprisoned, not enchanted, just there, resting, healing, possibly growing up a little. Circe teaches him. He listens. Maybe not enough, but enough to survive. And when he leaves, she lets him. There's power in that. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need a throne or a temple or a tragedy to justify its presence. Circe's strength was never in her spells. It was in her boundaries. You glance at her now. She's still stirring. The cauldron bubbles once. The scent of thyme and smoke wraps around your shoulders like a blanket. It's comforting, but sharp, like honesty. There's a story most people skip one about Circe's son. Yes, son. She had one with Odysseus, Telegonus. He grows up here barefoot like her, but restless. One day he leaves to find his father, and in a twist of mythic cruelty, ends up killing him by accident with a poisoned spear. Circe mourns, alone, again, and yet she remains. No statues built in her name, no temples, just this island, just this fire, just this woman who figured out how to survive in a world that kept trying to write her as a villain. There's a fringe detail. You'll love some versions say Circe lived long after all the other heroes died, that she outlasted empires, that she at the end turned herself into a star. not to be worshipped, just to shine. You finish your tea. Yes, she handed it to you somewhere along the way and set the cup down. She nods once. Not goodbye, just acknowledgement. You rise. The wind picks up. The path leads away from the fire, now into the dark. But you're not cold. You carry something warm with you, something herbal, something ancient. As you walk, you think maybe Circe wasn't lonely. Maybe she was just left alone for the first time in her life and decided to keep it that way. That's the trick, isn't it? To survive long enough to be misunderstood and still not become what they feared. You don't look back. She wouldn't want you to. The path narrows again, but this time it feels different. Less like a trail, more like a boundary between what you've already seen and what they never wanted you to see at all. You pass between gnarled olive trees, their branches knotting together like old fingers keeping secrets. The air smells of burned laurel and something sharp beneath it, something feral, the kind of scent that clings to nightmares and sometimes to truth. You don't walk fast. You're not supposed to. This next story waits in shadows, and it has claws. You reach the edge of an old palace ruin. Columns half-eaten by time ivy, like veins crawling across marble. At first, there's no sound, just the hush of dust, the exhale of ancient stone. But then you hear something, a faint cry, not a scream, smaller, high-pitched, fragile. You follow it. You shouldn't, but you do. Inside the room is dark. You can barely make out the figure in the corner, a woman on her knees, rocking. Her arms are empty, but she holds them like they once weren't. Her eyes hollow. This is Lamia, queen once. Now, something else entirely. You've likely heard of her as a bogey woman, the one who eats children, hides under beds, haunts the nightmares of young parents and naughty kids. But like all bedtime monsters, her story starts differently, softer, sadder. She was a Libyan queen, beautiful, of course, aren't they always? But more than that, intelligent, clever, beloved by her people. She caught Zeus's eye. And you already know what happens next. He pursued her. She didn't refuse. Maybe she loved him. Maybe she didn't have much of a choice. They had children, in secret. Then Hera found out. You remember Hera, right? Goddess of marriage, queen of Olympus, part-time revenge enthusiast. Her fury wasn't directed at Zeus, because it never was. It fell instead on Lamia, on her children. One by one they vanished, poisoned, stolen, erased. Some myths say Hera killed them. Others say she made Lamia kill them herself, driven mad by a curse of sleeplessness, unable to close her eyes, forced to relive the horror every moment. You picture it now, a mother awake for years, cradling nothing, screaming into the silence, digging her nails into her skin just to feel something. And then something shifted. The grief cracked, and something monstrous crawled out. Historians still argue whether Lamia transformed physically or just metaphorically. Some say she became serpent-like with a long, scaled body, golden eyes, and a taste for flesh. Others insist the transformation was all in the myth, a way to make sense of a woman's rage, to turn her into a cautionary tale. Either way, the stories agree on this. Lamia began to steal children, not out of hunger, out of revenge. She wandered the earth, hunting other people's babies, not because they were hers, but because they weren't. Because somewhere, in a mind fractured by loss, she thought taking what was stolen from her might balance the scales. Spoiler alert, it didn't. You walk slowly through the palace now, a ruin of memory. Faded murals line the walls, scenes of celebration, once now warped. A child's cradle lies broken in the corner. A golden earring in the shape of a crescent moon glints on the floor. You leave it there. You're not here to collect trophies. In one version of the myth, Lamia gouges out her own eyes, unable to bear the visions. In another, Zeus gives her the ability to remove and replace her eyes at will, like cursed jewelry. You imagine her walking through villages at night, eyeless, sniffing the air, hunting, not because she wants to, but because the stories say she must. She becomes a whispered threat, a story told to make children behave. But the part they leave out, she was once a mother too, and all her teeth were learned, not born. You reach a balcony that overlooks a dead courtyard. Below, vines crack the stone floor. There's something strange about the quiet here. It's not peaceful. It's waiting. Maybe she's still here. You remember how the myths described her voice, sometimes seductive, sometimes shrieking, always echoing long after the words have faded. Some say she was beautiful from the waist up, horrific from the waist down. Others say she was all horror all the time. But the truth, it shifts. It slips through fingers, like smoke. There is a modern theory, a fringe one, that Lamia's myth was used to discourage certain kinds of grief, that mothers who lost children were warned, mourn too loudly, and you'll become her. Grieve too long and you'll be feared. You pause beside a broken statue, its face worn smooth by centuries of wind, but you think you recognize her anyway. You say her name, quietly, not as a warning, as an apology. Lamia. The room grows colder, but not cruel. It feels like someone stopped crying. She wasn't a monster at first. She was a woman, undone. And when no one helped her heal the world, called her horror. You leave the ruins with slower steps, not from fear, from weight. You carry part of her now, not her rage, but her echo, the sound of grief, unsheltered. Outside, the night wind brushes your cheek like a ghost trying to remember touch. You keep walking. The path widens again, as if the story needed more space to breathe. But somewhere behind you, deep in the ruined palace, a lullaby is still being hummed. You'll never hear all the words, but you won't forget the tune. You leave Lamia's echo behind, though it trails you, like the scent of burned lavender, lingering unsettling, but oddly tender. The path ahead opens wider now, as if the world wants to give you breathing room. Not mercy exactly, just A pause. The sky is darker here, not night, just myth dark. The kind that never truly lifts, no matter how many suns have risen since the story was first whispered. You walk along an old goat path, the kind that zigzags just enough to make you feel watched from both directions. The stones underfoot are warm from stories told too often, retold badly, or not at all. You're heading toward another voice in the archive of accusation. Circe, again. She's waiting for you, not in her island this time, but in the footnotes, in the arguments, in the was she really all that bad margins of dusty symposium scrolls and suspiciously male-dominated retellings. You're about to meet her public relations disaster, because as much as Circe was feared, she was also discussed, endlessly, obsessively, quietly admired and loudly condemned, especially by men who feared what she represented. A woman alone, a woman in control, a woman with the power to say, no, I don't want you here, and then back it up with transformation. So here's where we crack into it. Monsters, men, and misunderstandings. The ancient trifecta. You walk into what looks like a decaying classroom, columns shaped like scrolls, walls, lined with broken amphorae, bearing words in fading ink. There's a chalkboard made of obsidian, still somehow slick, and empty benches curved in a half circle. You're alone, but the silence feels expectant, like centuries of bad takes are about to sit beside you, arms folded. Let's start with a question: was Circe ever evil? Historians still argue over this. Some portray her as a femme fatale, luring men to their doom. Others say she was a misunderstood protector, turning violent only when disrespected. The truth, like most things, is less dramatic and far more nuanced. Her spell work was not indiscriminate. It was reactive. You might remember from Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus sends a group of his men to scout her island. She welcomes them, feeds them, and then, depending on the version, turns them into pigs. But here's the twist. She does this only after they start behaving like predators, drinking too much, grabbing too much, expecting too much. Sound familiar? You've seen this movie. You've maybe lived it. She didn't attack Odysseus. She invited him in, listened to him, slept with him, sure, but not before laying down rules. She's not just a spellcaster, she's a boundary drawer. And that's what made her terrifying. Odysseus could leave. Most men couldn't handle that part. There's a lesser-known scroll you might enjoy. It describes Circe as a goddess of necessary resistance. It paints her not as a witch, but a threshold, the point at which reckless power is forced to confront its own reflection. The spell, just the mirror. You step into the center of the room. The obsidian chalkboard flares just for a second. With ancient graffiti, she turned me into a beast. You smirk. Did she? Or did she just show you the beast you already were? You glance at the benches. You can almost hear the voices, Plato scoffing about illusions, a Stoic muttering about virtue and temptation, a drunk playwright giggling into his robe sleeve. They all debated her, but none of them understood her. You sit for a moment, and the stone beneath you warms. Circe's story was always meant to evolve. She wasn't fixed in marble like Medusa. She was fluid, like the sea she lived beside, like the women she represents. Some myths say she taught her magic to others, that her legacy outlived her, that witches through the ages whispered her name while mixing herbs and setting boundaries. Others say she became a warning. Don't be too powerful, too alone, too aware of your worth, or you'll end up like her. You rise again. The chalkboard has changed. Now it reads, men feared her, women visited. You leave the symposium behind, not with answers, with questions sharpened into tools. You find yourself back on the path, which now winds through a grove of ancient pines. Each tree bears a mark, carved initials, symbols, fragments of prayers. It's the kind of place people come to leave things behind, regrets, names, or curses softened into caution. And here comes another fragment. Remember, Hermes' messenger, god delivery guy of Olympus, occasional chaos enabler. He's the one who gave Odysseus the antidote to Circe's spells, not because he believed in love, but because balance must be maintained. In myth, in story, in consequence. Hermes feared what would happen if a man powerful as Odysseus became just another grunt grunting in the mud. But Circe, she welcomed the antidote, let the men change back, fed them, cared for them. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to teach. You reach a clearing, a stone basin in the center, filled with water so still it looks like glass. You lean over. Circe's face stares back at you. Not her face exactly, just the idea of her. Wise, wary, tired of explaining herself. And then you realize maybe this isn't Circe at all. Maybe it's you. Because every person who walks this path carries some part of her now, the part that learned through trial and terror that peace isn't given. It's protected. You touch the surface. It doesn't ripple. She's still watching. You nod. She nods back, and you keep walking. Not because you have to, because you can. The pines thin out behind you. The basin and the last of Circe's echoes sink into the ground like they were never there. Just a pause between storms. Ahead, the earth flattens. It feels strangely open here and a little too quiet, like someone just swept the stage, but forgot to turn the lights off. You squint into the dusk, and there, barely visible at first, is a shape. No temples, no stone halls, just a bedroom, not the royal kind. Humble, tiled floor, shuttered windows, a cradle in the corner that rocks gently though there's no wind. You hesitate. You step inside. The air changes. It thickens. It sweetens. But not like honey, more like perfume that's been left open, too long gone sharp at the edges. This is the part where the myths get uncomfortable, because you're about to meet Lamia again. But not that Lamia. No serpent limbs, no gaping mouth, no fangs. Just a woman brushing her hair in front of a cracked mirror. Her eyes, once hollow, now gleam with something brittle. Her hand is steady, too steady. She sees you, but she doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Because this story isn't really about Lamia anymore. It's about all the women, rewritten in her image. You sit on the edge of a dusty bed. Across the room, the air shivers and another form appears, similar, but winged, talons instead of hands. A face somewhere between fury and sadness. She crouches in the window like a crow judging a battlefield. You've just met a harpy, or rather, what's left of her reputation. In early Greek myth, harpies were wine spirits, swift, graceful agents of divine justice. The name means snatchers, but not always in a sinister way. They were messengers, carriers, sometimes just metaphors for sudden loss, a wind that takes something precious too quickly. But over time, the image twisted, especially when Rome got involved. The harpies were no longer just wind. They became foul-smelling, ugly, vengeful, punishers of sinners, the kind of beings poets use to represent female rage as if it were unnatural. They came shrieking, clawing, soiling everything they touched. Charming. Historians still argue whether this shift in depiction was influenced by changing religious attitudes or just Rome's uncanny talent for making every woman over 30 into a horror story. Either way, the harpies went from ethereal to grotesque in just a few centuries, and their only crime being female, being fast, being uncatchable. You look at the one in the window. She hasn't moved. You swear her feathers are made of ash. In the myth of King Phineus, the harpies are sent to torment him. Why? Because he revealed too much of the god's plans, or maybe because he mistreated his sons. The details are vague, conveniently vague. The harpies swoop in, steal his food, spoil what's left, shriek over his head. It sounds awful, until you learn what kind of man he was. There's a fringe theory found in one 4th century scroll with a suspicious number of ink smudges that the harpies were punishing him not for revealing secrets, but for cruelty. That the gods used them like truth's final breath, swift, sharp, unapologetic, the wind that says, "You're done now." But later versions retcon that, because angry women can't be justice. They have to be monsters. You stand and approach the window. The harpy watches you. Her face isn't bird-like at all. It's human, devastatingly so. Tired, not because she's old, but because she's been told she's old. So many times, it wore her down. She blinks once, then disappears. You exhale. You exit the room. Outside, the world smells like fresh rain. You didn't notice it falling. Myths do that sometimes, sneak up while you're looking the other way. You walk toward the edge of a cliff. Another one. Seems like all these stories lead to cliffs eventually. Maybe that's where the old gods like to sit, watching, judging, pretending to help. You sit down this time, legs swinging into air. You think about how many creatures were made monstrous because men couldn't name their own fear. Circe said no and was called dangerous. Lamia wept and was called a child killer. The harpies moved too fast and were called foul. You see the pattern yet? You hear a whisper behind you. Just whine this time. No feathers, no claws, just breath. You lie there for a moment longer, letting the sound of the wind carry you, not forward, not back, just outward, like you're floating above it all. But the stories don't let you drift for long. They anchor you, again gently but firmly, tugging at the edge of your curiosity. There's more. So you sit up. Another path waits for you, this one narrower, rockier, lined with twisted cypress trees that seem to lean in just a bit too far, like they're eavesdropping. Or maybe warning. The ground crunches beneath your feet, dry leaves, old bones, opinions. The next figure in the shadows doesn't greet you. She doesn't need to, because this one was never meant to be seen clearly. This is Empousa. She might be one woman, or many, or a species, or a metaphor. Even the myths aren't sure. She comes to you in parts, one leg of bronze, the other of a donkey, or sometimes fire. Her body flickers like candlelight, beautiful 1 second, grotesque the next. A shapeshifter, a nightmare built from fragments of fear, and always female. She was a daughter of Hecate, some say the goddess of witchcraft and crossroads. Others call her a demon, a ghost, a warning, but let's rewind. You're in a village now, old, quiet, clay pots and shuttered windows. There's a festival happening, lamps flickering in doorways, bread baking in open ovens, laughter threading the air. But something feels off. You see a woman by herself, hair unbound, eyes too bright. The villagers whisper behind their hands. You step closer. Her form wavers. That's Empousa, or what they said she was. Her story, like so many others, is mostly told by men warning boys about lust. A seductress who sleeps with travelers, then devours them. Who shapeshifts into their fantasies, then punishes them for falling for the illusion. She doesn't chase. She waits. And still she's feared. Historians still argue whether Empousa was ever meant to be a literal creature. Some say she was invented as a bedtime threat to keep young men virtuous. Others believe she was an embodiment of guilt, sex, desire, fear, all stitched into a monster because no one wanted to admit the danger wasn't her. It was them. The room changes again. You're in a symposium. Oil lamps sputter. Wine sloshes. A young man, cocky, unsure, tells a story about how he escaped Empousa once. Claims he saw through her disguise. Claims she screamed and vanished. Everyone laughs. But none of them ask, why was she there in the first place? You do. You follow her out of the symposium into the back alleys of myth. You find her in a courtyard, shifting, not hiding, not hunting, just existing. You see her become an old woman, a little girl, a warrior, a lover, a corpse. And every time she changes someone somewhere, screams, monster. You sit beside her. She doesn't speak, but the silence is thick with exhaustion. You think maybe she was never meant to be anything but a mirror held up to men who didn't want to see themselves clearly. There's a fringe theory that says Empousa wasn't one figure at all, but a code, a way to pass down warnings among women. Here's how they'll see you if you say yes. Here's how they'll punish you if you say no. She looks at you now. Her face doesn't flicker. It's just a woman's face, tired, beautiful, normal. She leans close. You expect a hiss, a threat, but all she says is, "They never asked what I wanted." Then she vanishes, not in a puff of smoke, just gone. You blink. You're back on the path again. The symposium is gone. The village, too. Only the trees remain, and they hum gently, with things left unsaid. You think about how many stories are just warnings disguised as entertainment. How many monsters were born from the simple act of saying no and meaning it. You think about Empousa, never. One thing, always blamed. You keep walking. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays. You can't tell if it's real or just one of her legs saying goodbye. It says they weren't the monsters. They were the aftermath. You lie back on the stone. The stars above look the same, but they're watching differently now. You close your eyes, and for just a moment you imagine the harpies flying again, not in anger, but in freedom. Not screeching, but singing. Not monsters. Messengers, carriers of truth, with wings like smoke and voices that never needed to be soft. The braying fades, and the path opens into a vast flat field. Moonlight spills over it like spilled milk, thick, quiet, unhurried. You're not sure what you're walking toward now. Nothing looms. No ruins, no cliffs, just grass swaying in a breeze that doesn't seem to come from anywhere at all. It feels empty, but the kind of empty that holds things, whispers, names, wing beats. You hear them before you see them, soft rustles above, shadows flitting across the moon. Something's circling. You tilt your head, and there they are. The Harpy sisters. Yes, again. But not as you last saw them. This isn't the lonely window, the broken cradle, or the fury-chiseled mask. These are the Harpies in flight, 3 of them, weaving through the sky like smoke ribbons, their wings spread wide. They don't scream. They hum. And they're not grotesque. They're beautiful. Not the delicate kind of beauty. Not painted eyes and curled hair. Beauty. This is something else. Raw. Elemental. The beauty of wind carving stone over a 1,000 years. They were never meant to be monsters. You're starting to feel that, more than know it. The oldest texts, really old ones from before the tragedies and the epics and the temple dramas, describe them as the swift ones, daughters of Thomas and Electra, sisters of Iris, the rainbow. They were minor goddesses once, spirits of storm winds and sudden change, messengers, guardians, and yes, snatchers, but not of children or sanity, of souls, of secrets, of truth too delicate to travel any other way. You lie back in the grass, let them circle. And you remember the story that wrecked their reputation, King Phineas. You've heard his name before, back in that echoing room with the broken amphorae and self-important philosophers. He was a seer, a man who saw too much, or said too much, or did too little with the knowledge he had. Depends who you ask. The gods punished him not by striking him down, but by sending the harpies. Every time he tried to eat, they came, stole the food, spoiled what they didn't take, left the place reeking. The message was clear: you don't get to enjoy the world you tried to manipulate. But over the centuries, poets turned the story, shifted the tone, made the harpies the punishment, not just the messengers, because it's easier to fear the warning than the thing being warned about. There's a scroll buried in a monastery vault and half erased by centuries of damp air that describes the harpies not as tormentors, but protectors. That Phineas had mistreated his children, or his wife, or a goddess in disguise, and the harpies weren't sent to torment, but to shield. Historians still argue whether the harpies were divine enforcers or scapegoats. What's not debated is how fast their reputation soured once Roman dramatists got involved. The claws, added later, the filth embellished, the ugliness, well, convenient. You watch the three sisters now. They glide without flapping, as if they've earned rest mid-flight. Their wings aren't feathered, not exactly. They shimmer, like fish scales dipped in dusk. One of them lands nearby. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You feel her gaze, not threatening, appraising. You ask in your mind more than aloud, why were you rewritten? She tilts her head. And then she shows you, not with pictures, not with words, but with memory. 1,000 scared men sitting around 1,000 fires, needing a face to paint on guilt, on fear, on hunger. Blame the sky women, the winged ones, the watchers. She reaches out, not with a claw, but a hand. Fingers long and smooth, calloused like someone who has caught too many things, falling too fast. She presses one finger to your chest. You see, a mother in a market praying her child comes home. A sailor staring into the wind, whispering to a bird that isn't there. A priest, too afraid to admit he's lonely, inventing demons with breasts and wings. Then she's gone. The field empties again. The wind still moves. And you understand something now. The harpies weren't chaos. They were consequence, not punishment. Reminder. Your choices echo. You sit up, brush the dew from your arms. The grass is glowing slightly in the moonlight, every blade humming like a tuning fork, tuned to the frequency of stories left out. You think of the phrase again. They spoiled his food. You smile. Maybe they were trying to tell him, you can't feast while others starve. Maybe that's why they were erased. You walk forward. The wind wraps around you now, not cold, but charged, like it remembers your name, like it might carry it to the next story. You let it. The path returns barely visible, just dirt, pressed down by myth. You step onto it, without thinking. You don't need to see where it goes. You know by now. The monsters aren't waiting for you. They're walking beside you. The path ahead glows faintly like the dust itself remembers how to shimmer. The night has thickened around you, not with fear, but with presence. Like the air has weight now, like the stories you've walked through are pressing against your skin gently, but insistently reminding you that you're not just observing, you're participating. You pass under a half-fallen arch draped in ivy. A breeze follows you through rustling the leaves in a way that almost sounds like laughter. You're not sure if it's meant kindly. You keep walking. You enter a library, or rather what's left of one. Shelves, long collapsed scrolls, curled into themselves like sleeping animals. But something about this place feels intact, if not in structure, then in purpose. There's a single table still upright, and on it, a candle burning low, a stylus left mid-thought, and a single phrase carved into the wood, sky claws and censorship. It's not a title you'd expect in a sacred archive. But then again, this library wasn't sacred. It was strategic. Because here's where the harpy's story was rewritten. You sit at the table, careful not to disturb the wax drippings that have fossilized into little golden cliffs. You touch the stylus. It feels warm, like someone just left. Maybe they did. And that's the thing with myths. They're not static. They move, shift, adapt, get edited, especially when they become inconvenient. You already met the harpies last section, saw them in flight, saw them in grief. But now in this place, you're seeing what happened to them, not because of them. You're here to witness their erasure. You look up. A mural spans the far wall, faded, cracked, but legible. 3 women, winged and proud, circling above a man with outstretched hands. Not pleading, accusing. A ribbon of text curves around the scene in ancient Greek. You don't need to translate it. It says they brought judgment, so we gave them shame. Let's talk about propaganda. It's not a modern invention. Even in the age of lyres and laurel wreaths, the pen or the chisel was used to control the narrative. When women in myth got too powerful, too ambiguous, or too uncomfortably close to truth, they were reshaped. And the harpies, perfect targets, swift moral, untouchable. So the poets rewrote them, not just once, repeatedly. Each generation added something new, the stench that came later, the claws sharpened, the faces twisted, because the easiest way to silence a woman with wings is to make her repulsive, not just feared, but dismissed. A thing no one would want to listen to. Historians still argue which version of the harpies came first. The sky spirits, the wind messengers, the vengeful crones. But what they do agree on is this: the Roman Empire industrialized their monstrosity. Virgil, in the Aeneid, really hammered it home, turning the harpies into shrieking creatures who defile what they touch, guardians of filth and punishment. Not justice, not sorrow, just disgust. You walk deeper into the stacks, what's left of them. Here's a scroll with only one line intact. We clip their wings by teaching men to laugh at them. Here's another half-burned. To call her foul is to silence her fury. You touch the spines of crumbling books. Some have titles, some just symbols. All hum with the same buried truth, a fear of female consequence dressed up in feathers and rot. You wonder what the harpies were before the rewrites, before the smear campaign, before the clawed caricature became canon. There's a theory, rare whispered in the margins of witchcraft texts, that the harpies were once invoked by women, not feared, called, asked to bear away pain and justice, the memory of harm. Take it from me, they might have prayed. Snatch it. Let me sleep. Imagine that harpies not as predators, but healers, not as thieves, but redeemers. But that version didn't last, because a creature that listens to women and punishes men, that's not a myth, that's a liability. So the script changed. You exit the stacks, back into the main room. The mural looks different now. Maybe it always did. The harpies aren't circling above the man. They're protecting something behind him, a door, a child, a name you can't quite see. The mural cracks again, and a piece of plaster falls. You hear the faint flap of wings, not from the painting, from outside. You look up. Through a hole in the ceiling, the sky swirls, not stormy, just moving. The harpies are still out there. They never stopped flying. You walk out of the library, and the door swings shut behind you, not with malice, just closure. As you step back onto the path, the wind catches your hair, tugs it slightly like a bird testing a branch. And you realize something. They weren't censored because they were monsters. They were censored because they were right. You walk now with a strange awareness, like something invisible is moving beside you, not threatening, not quite friendly, but deeply aware. The harpies have left their mark, not in scratches or shrieks, but in how you notice the silence now, how you question the words carved into stone, how you wonder who got to hold the stylus and who got turned into the story. The path twists again. You step into a clearing. It's small, overgrown, half swallowed by brambles. But in the center stands a tall column topped with nothing but wrapped tightly in red silk, weather-worn and trembling slightly in the breeze. A name has been scratched near the base. You brush away the moss and read it aloud. Empousa. Again. But this time her legacy is different. This is not the shapeshifter who vanished in smoke or nightmares. This is her long-legged shadow, drawn large across time. She's taller here, more structured. She walks with purpose, and she doesn't hide in the dark anymore. You walk around the column once, and the scene changes. You're suddenly in a narrow street in Athens, thousands of years ago. You feel the dry heat in the cracks of the pavement, the olive pits underfoot, the quiet tension of philosophical debate wafting out of an open-air courtyard. Someone's telling a joke about Empousa again, but it doesn't land, because in this version of the story, she's not the punchline. She's the point. Empousa was feared, yes, but not because she was grotesque, because she saw through things. Literally, if the myths are true. Her eyes could pierce disguises, intentions, even fate. That was her real danger, not the donkey leg or the bronze foot, or the tendency to devour lecherous men. It was her clarity, and that's terrifying. You pass a group of young men laughing too loudly, sipping watered wine, trying not to look insecure. One tells the tale of how he saw Empousa in a dream. She was a queen, a demon, a stranger at the edge of his bed. He swears she whispered his secrets back to him before vanishing. His friends laugh. He doesn't. Historians still argue whether Empousa was ever worshipped. There are no temples, no surviving hymns, no clay figurines clearly marked as her. But there are strange ritual inscriptions scratched under beds and along door frames asking her for protection. If you must come, come kindly. If you must take only the dream. You walk past a crumbling theater now. On its stage, a lone actor stands in a red mask. One leg, silver-painted, the other bent, strangely. She doesn't move. She waits. The audience fidgets. Then she speaks, and her voice cuts through marble. Not a scream, not a moan, just truth. You called me monster, so you wouldn't have to remember touching me. The audience goes silent, then restless, then angry, because the mirror is talking now, and no one wants to see that much reflection all at once. You step behind the theater. There's a small alley, a mural scratched into the plaster. Empousa again. But this time she's surrounded by students, women mostly. One of them has a scroll, another a bowl of herbs. They're listening, not in fear, in study. This is the version of her the footnotes don't mention. The teacher, the philosopher, the wild sage who wandered into towns not to seduce or punish, but to warn. These are the paths they won't let you take. Here are the stories they won't write you into. This is how you shapeshift and survive. The red silk from the column, it trails behind her like a sash or a flame. You blink. You're back at the column. The brambles are gone. In their place, wild flowers. You hear wind again and laughter. But it's hers now. Not cruel. Just knowing. You think of the phrase often muttered by sleepless women. I feel like I'm being haunted by something with my own face. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was always her. The long-legged lesson they didn't want you to memorize. The voice at the edge of sleep reminding you you're allowed to change shape. They always did. Why shouldn't you? You step away from the column, and somewhere beneath your feet, the earth exhales. She's still watching, not to judge, just to make sure no one rewrites you without your permission. You walk for a while without thinking. The red silk still flickers in your memory, winding behind you like a ribbon that doesn't want to be cut. The night is quieter now, not empty, just full of listening. The kind of silence that waits, not because it's unsure, but because it knows you're about to ask the right question. And sure enough, here it comes. Why do we keep inventing monsters, only to bury their origin? The path bends sharply. You step into a cave. Not the dripping, echoing kind from childhood adventure books. This one is shallow. More like a shelter, a place to sit when the wind turns mean. There's writing on the walls, every surface, names, phrases, doodles, bits of spell work and insults and journal entries. Some in Greek, some in Latin, some in languages long extinct. All of them circling a single phrase etched deep into the stone over and over again. Empousa is watching. You run your fingers over the grooves. They're shallow but precise, like they were carved quickly but not carelessly. The message is clear. She wasn't forgotten. She was hidden, and she wasn't alone. This cave, this chalk-covered whisper chamber, was a warning, but not against her, against the story that swallowed her. You settle on a smooth stone bench and breathe in the chalk dust. It smells like history, like fear baked into limestone. You pick a name at random. It's half erased. The rest of the letters trail off into a smudge. You realize this isn't graffiti. This is protection. A ward. A prayer. You think about how many of these women, Empousa, Lamia, the harpies, Medusa, all the half-remembered, misquoted, distorted shadows were never meant to be monsters. They were tools, not in the myth, of the myth. They were used. You walk to the far end of the cave. A small alcove holds a broken mirror. Again, with the mirrors. You look. You expect your own face. But it's not quite that. It's Empousa again, her outline anyway. Flickering, not threatening, just echoing. You see flashes of her many forms, the young maiden with one bronze foot, the shapeshifter in a crimson robe, the night breather watching travelers dream too loud. And then you. Because here's the part the myths always leave out. Empousa became what the world needed to fear in order to keep certain doors shut. And then she became what other women needed to survive. A warning, a ghost, a memory with teeth. You reach up and touch the mirror. It doesn't reflect anymore. It ripples. You feel warmth. And from the far end of the cave a voice, not a scream, not a whisper, but a statement, unfurls like incense. What they call fear, we call memory. You turn, there's no one there. But the cave has changed. Now the chalk marks glow faintly, like fireflies frozen mid-flight. You read a few. She turned away instead of toward. They called it trickery, but it was refusal. Her silence was louder than their laws. Each one is a spell, each one a correction. You think about the boys who grew up with stories of Empousa, told to fear her in the dark, to distrust anything that looked like desire, to equate beauty with danger. You wonder what those stories did to them, and you wonder what was lost in the telling. There's a scroll pinned to the wall near the exit. Brittle, half gone but legible. Empousa, she who reflects the shame of those who name her. Do not call her unless you are ready to see your own face. You leave the cave, not because you've learned enough, but because she's done teaching for now. Outside, the night air has changed. It's cooler, but not cruel. There's a rhythm to the wind now, like slow breathing. You match your steps to it. There's still more to walk, still more to see. But something's different now. Empousa's not behind you anymore. She's beside you. Not a shadow, a witness. You walk onward, and the path doesn't shrink. It widens, as if finally the myth is making room for you. The path ahead opens, like a mouth held mid-sigh, gentle, worn a little sad around the edges. You step forward slowly, aware now of how many feet have passed this way, how many stories have soaked into the ground. It doesn't feel haunted. It feels inherited. And up ahead, just beyond the brush, the cave gives way to firelight. Not flame, just glow. You've entered a hollowed-out valley, and there in the center is a pool that reflects no stars. Its surface is obsidian, still black as forgotten ink. Around it, columns lean at odd angles. The air smells of sulfur and salt. Something old lives here, not malicious, just too tired to care what you think. This is where she waits. Echidna, not a monster in passing, not a footnote, not a misunderstood foot soldier of some petty divine drama. Echidna is the mother of monsters. You take a breath, and you step closer. She doesn't rise from the pool. She is the pool, or was, or chose to be. The myths aren't clear. Some say she lives underground, half nymph, half serpent. Others say she lies sleeping beneath Mount Etna, dreaming of her children, waiting for them to call her name again. But all the stories agree on one thing: she gave birth to everything that made heroes famous. Cerberus, the three-headed hound. Chimera, part lion, part goat, part snake. Hydra, the many-headed terror. The Sphinx, the riddle keeper. She didn't raise them in a cradle. She birthed them into necessity. You kneel beside the pool. The surface ripples just once. You hear something move beneath it, a heartbeat. That's not yours. Slow, confident, immortal. You expect to feel fear. You feel comfort. Because Echidna wasn't feared in the way Medusa was. She wasn't wept for like Scylla. She wasn't rewritten like Empousa. She was respected in a hushed, uneasy, don't look her directly in the eye sort of way. Because even gods fear the ones who can create. Historians still argue whether Echidna was worshipped or merely tolerated. No temples, no hymns. But signs of her linger in cave markings, in ancient lullabies, sung with odd cadences, in forgotten villages where women whispered to the earth before giving birth. She was the blueprint, the starting line, the mother whose womb was a myth-making engine. And her partner. We'll get to him. But first, you sit beside the pool and imagine her. Half beautiful, half beast. Not because she was cursed, but because she chose both. She was duality before the philosophers got around to defining it. Her snake half wasn't shameful. It was sacred. She didn't seduce. She didn't deceive. She simply was. And the world called her unnatural, because creation without permission always is. You look into the water again. You see her children flash across the surface like flickers of heat lightning, Cerberus guarding the gates of the underworld, wagging three tails, the chimera breathing fire over a mountain pass, the hydra regrowing its heads faster than anyone can cut them. And you realize none of them were villains. They were guardians, tests, thresholds, each one placed in the path of a hero, not to destroy, but to reveal, to make them prove their strength, their cleverness, their worth. Echidna didn't birth evil. She birthed consequence. And when those heroes told their tales, they left her out. Convenient, isn't it? You sit a moment longer. The pool speaks not in words, but in images. You see a woman lying on a bed of moss belly swollen with something no one has dared name. Her eyes are closed. She is not in pain. She is not afraid. She is becoming. And the world is trembling in anticipation. You hear a whisper in your ear and you know it's her. They fear what comes from me because they cannot control it. You stand. You bow, just a little, and you keep walking. The firelight fades. The pool disappears behind a veil of vines that weren't there before. The ground hums softly underfoot. You feel a pressure in your chest, not fear. Origin, as if something new has been planted inside you. You don't know what it is yet, but you will. Because Echidna doesn't just birth monsters, she births transformation. The air behind you still buzzes with the presence of Echidna, low subterranean, the kind of vibration you feel more in your ribs than your ears. But ahead of you, it shifts, thickens, the kind of change you don't hear or see, just know. Something heavier waits around the bend. And it's not just because Echidna didn't birth all those monsters on her own. No one ever really creates alone. He's waiting, not in a cave, but in the mountain itself. You climb now, not steep, not perilous, just upward, stone beneath your hands, sulfur in the air. The ground is hot, not burning, but warm like something under your feet remembers how to burn. This is Typhon's domain, her consort, her equal, or maybe her opposite. The myths can't agree. You reach a plateau where the rocks are blackened, fused together like glass. Lightning scorched this place once, or maybe it was just him. Typhon, not a god, not quite a titan, more than a monster. He was described as taller than mountains, his arms stretching to the east and west, his eyes glowing red with divine rage, his legs serpents. Of course, his voice, every sound you hope never to hear in a storm, all at once. You step into the center of the plateau. It's empty, but not really. He's here, or his outline is, burned into the earth like a shadow. His form is too big for your vision to contain, so the myths always do it for you, shattering him into metaphors, fragments, things you can wrap your terrified mind around. But Echidna knew him as a lover, a partner, a storm that matched her silence. Together they didn't build empires. They built thresholds. Monsters, yes. Guardians, warnings, proving grounds. The gods feared them, so they did what gods do best. They went to war. Zeus, of course, led the charge. Because how dare something greater than him exist outside Olympus? Typhon fought back, shaking the world, melting mountains, flinging fire and ash across the sky. The battle, some say, lasted days. Others say centuries. Time doesn't behave normally when primal forces clash. Historians still argue whether Typhon represents a real natural disaster volcano, earthquake, tidal wave, or just the fear of nature itself. The parts no one could predict, control, or bargain with. In the end, Zeus won, because that's how these stories are structured. The king of gods smote Typhon with lightning and buried him beneath Mount Etna. That's why the volcano erupts. That's what the old stories say. Typhon still shifts in his stone coffin, still growls in magma, still dreams in tremors. You crouch, place your hand to the ground, and you feel him. Not violent, just vast. That's the thing no one ever admits. Typhon was terrifying, yes, but terror wasn't his only language. He loved Echidna. They created together. There's no cruelty in their union, only scale. You look up at the mountain. Etna rises above you, quiet for now, but not asleep. You wonder what it would mean if he ever woke. Not to destroy, just to speak. Would anyone listen, or would they smite him again? You sit for a moment on a scorched ledge. The wind here is sharp. It doesn't scream. It murmurs. You think about how Typhon wasn't defeated alone. Olympus brought every weapon, every trick, every title to subdue him. Because power that doesn't kneel must be broken. They didn't ask where his fury came from. They didn't ask what he protected. They just labeled him catastrophe. Echidna remained. He did not. And maybe that's the saddest part. Not the loss, but the forgetting. Because when you remember Echidna, you remember motherhood. When you remember Typhon, you remember wrath. And what if they were both more than that? What if they were just trying to make space? You rise. The plateau seems smaller now. Not because you've grown, but because you've understood. Typhon wasn't evil. He was inconvenient. And for that, he was buried. You leave the mountain behind. The path winds back downward. The air lightens, but the ground beneath you still rumbles slightly, like a heartbeat trying not to be heard. You listen anyway, because he's still there. And some stories aren't trying to break out. They're waiting for someone to knock. You descend slowly. Etna fades behind you, massive, immovable, yet somehow smaller than the story that buried Typhon beneath it. The warmth of the ground fades too, replaced by something cooler. Mist begins to gather, curling low around your feet like ancient breath. It clings to your ankles but never chills you. You get the sense it's not trying to hide anything, it's just covering what people refuse to look at. You're walking toward the sea again, but not the crashing cliffs of Scylla, not the endless black of her grief. This is different. The air here is thicker, not with salt, with silence, like the world is holding its breath. And then you see her, not rising, not emerging, just there. You've reached Ceto, goddess of the deep. Not a monster, not even quite a mother. She's something else entirely. The sea around her is still, not calm, just waiting. You approach the shoreline. There's no sand, only dark pebbles and bits of coral smoothed by centuries. The water doesn't lap. It hovers, as if uncertain whether to let you pass or swallow you whole. You stay at the edge. Ceto doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She doesn't need to. She's the mother of sea monsters, they say. The ancient, the primal, the unknowable. The kind of creatures sailors drew on maps with curled tails and gaping maws, not out of knowledge, but because they couldn't bear to leave the unknown unmarked. And Ceto, she was the why. Not a queen, not a fury, just the explanation. The ocean had to be terrifying, and so she was invented or named to justify it. Historians still argue whether she was a personification or a full-fledged deity. Her name shows up in lists and lineages, rarely in temples. No statues, no offerings. Just bloodlines. Just monsters. Phorcys, her brother and consort, joins her in most genealogies. Together, they parented some of mythology's most feared children, the Gorgons, the Graiae Ladon, the dragon, and even Echidna herself in some versions. You realize, standing here, that Ceto isn't about rage or revenge or even grief. She's about origin, but not the kind you celebrate, the kind you blame. When sailors vanished, they whispered her name. When ships sank without warning. They said she must be angry. When something vast and strange stirred beneath the waves, it was her fault. You look out across the still surface, and in the distance, something breaks it. Just for a second. Not a fin, not a wave. Just an eye. Watching. Then gone. You kneel, fingers brushing the surface. The water is warm, not welcoming, just alive. You think about how many things have been blamed on the ocean, on the feminine, on the vast, the deep, the unreachable. Ceto didn't curse anyone. She just was. And that made her monstrous. Because anything too big to understand, anything that doesn't blink, must be dangerous, must be punished, or flattened, or labeled with something that sounds like a warning. You lean closer to the water, and you see her, not her face, not even her form, just a suggestion, the curve of something too large to name, the shadow of a mother who was never allowed to cradle, only to consume. There is a theory only found in one obscure fragment from a lost island cult, that Ceto was once the name given to the deep ocean before the gods claimed dominion over it, before Poseidon, before Olympus. Just her, the silence before prayer, the dark before navigation. She wasn't a being, she was boundary. You step back. The mist curls tighter. You don't feel afraid. You feel small. And for once, it's not a bad thing. Ceto doesn't hate the sailors. She doesn't love the monsters. She's just the reminder that nature isn't here to comfort you. It's here to exist. You turn from the water. And as you do, the shoreline disappears behind you. Not receding, just no longer visible. You're not supposed to walk backward in her presence. So you don't. You keep going. And as you walk, you hear no applause, no howling, no crashing waves, just the sound of your own feet on wet stone, and the knowledge that some goddesses don't need temples. They are the temple. The sea mists curl away as you walk inland again, like a great exhale you didn't realize you were holding. Your clothes are dry, though you're certain you stood at the edge of something enormous. The ground shifts beneath you, not trembling like Typhon, not humming like Echidna, just adjusting, as though it's clearing space for someone you've forgotten. You're walking through a garden now, not a mythic one, a real one, or as real as anything in this dream world of broken temples and memory echoes. Wild rosemary grows beside overgrown columns. Laurel bushes tangle with fig trees. Owls blink from their perches, silent and judging. There's a structure up ahead, small, cracked. It looks like a library. You feel the stories pulling you forward, not toward battle, toward books. The space is circular, roofless, ivy dripped. A gentle wind flips through scrolls left open on marble benches. You pass a table and scattered across it are fragments, statues with missing heads, shattered reliefs, names half-carved, and then clearly abandoned. This is a place for forgotten truths. And at the center sits one statue, still intact, A woman, no wings, no claws, no serpents. She sits with one hand resting on a closed scroll. The other holds a mask. And you know somehow that mask was never meant for her to wear. You've entered the final archive. This is where stories were changed not by accident, but by design. You circle the statue. No plaque, no name. But you know who this is. She's all of them. Every woman turned into a footnote, a warning, a villain. She is Medusa, Circe, Lamia, Scylla, Empousa, Sato. She is Athena too. Yes, even her. The goddess of wisdom, who sometimes betrayed the very women who sought her protection, who turned victims into monsters, who wore Medusa's head on her shield and called it justice. You stop walking because that realization hits harder than any battle. Athena punished Medusa. Athena helped Perseus. Athena defended patriarchy, dressed in armor made of intellect. And the question rises, why historians still argue whether Athena's actions were out of divine duty or a deeper, internalized logic. That in a world ruled by male gods, to maintain power as a woman meant aligning with them, even if it meant sacrificing other women. What does it cost to survive Olympus? What must you become? There's a theory, controversial of course, that Athena was never meant to be a goddess of war, that she began as a wisdom spirit, later reshaped into a battlefield icon to suit the growing empire's needs. They took her books and gave her spears, took her voice and gave her a shield, and Medusa's head. That wasn't a trophy, it was a warning. You stand in front of the statue. The mask she holds isn't monstrous, it's blank. The kind you paint your own face onto, or someone else's. It's meant to be worn by whoever needs to tell the story next. And that's the problem. The myths aren't just stories. They're scripts. And every woman in them had her lines rewritten. You hear footsteps behind you, soft, echoing. You don't turn around, because you already know what they are. The women, the ones who were transformed, punished, mislabeled, weaponized. They're not angry. They're tired. Tired of being remembered only for their fangs and their fire. Tired of being dissected without being heard. Tired of being told what they meant. You place your hand on the statue's scroll. It's warm, and you know it's not closed forever, just resting. You whisper something, not a spell, not a prayer, just a promise. We remember you now, and from the trees the owls blink once more, not in judgment, in recognition. You turn from the statue. The library doesn't vanish, it just fades gently like smoke after the wind. You're on the path again. It's straighter now, clearer, like the stories you've gathered are lighting the way. You think of Athena, not as goddess, not as villain, but as a woman in a system built to consume her. And you walk forward with her too. Because the truth is, no one escapes the edit. But you're starting to read the margins. You walk on, and now the path feels softer beneath your feet. Not soil, not stone, but something in between, like packed earth once used for dancing or mourning or both. The air is still, not tense, not alert, just ready, like the world around you has finally caught up with the weight of the stories you've carried this far. And you feel it too. A kind of quiet truth pressing at your shoulders, not heavy, just persistent. You come to a clearing. In the center is a ring of stones, simple, human-sized, uncarved, each one worn smooth by time, by wind, by maybe tears. There's a fire in the middle, or rather, the idea of a fire. No flames, just the glow, like memory that refuses to fade even after the people who made it are long gone. You step into the circle, and there they are. The women, all of them, not in bodies, in impressions. Scylla leans against a rock, her dog-headed tormentors quiet at her sides. Medusa sits with her back to you, hair hanging like heavy seaweed, unmoving. Lamia rocks something invisible in her arms. Empousa flickers at the edges, her face shifting so slowly you almost miss it. Circe stirs a pot of ash that no longer boils. Ceto waits beside her, vast and wordless. Even Athena is here, her armor missing her shield, turned face down in the dust. They don't speak. They remember. And they let you watch. You sit because standing feels wrong, too formal, too distant. You wait. And slowly they begin to move, not dramatically, not in protest, just in being. A glance shared, a breath, a sigh, the kind of communion that doesn't need words, because this is where it happens, not the transformation, the translation. This is the place where women were made into monsters, not by magic, not by curses, but by narrative, by the slow erosion of truth under the weight of fear and convenience. You feel it in your bones now. That myth was never just entertainment. It was design. Circe turns to you first. She looks tired, but not defeated. She nods. You think of how her island was a sanctuary rewritten as a trap. You think of how many women have had their homes misnamed. Lamia glances up next. Her eyes are soft, not full of hunger, full of memory. You think of how grief, when left untreated, becomes legend. You think of how rage, denied language, becomes myth. Medusa finally lifts her head. And in that instant you see everything. Not the snakes, not the stone, just the girl in the temple who prayed for silence and got punished for not making noise. She looks at you like she's asking, will you tell it differently this time? And that's when you understand. This isn't a council of monsters. It's a courtroom for stories. And you're the witness, not for their crimes, for their rewriting. Historians still argue whether myths evolve or are corrupted. But sitting here, you see clearly, they are adapted to suit power, to explain away fear, to justify silence. A branch snaps in the distance. No one moves, not because they're afraid, because they're used to it. You stay for what feels like hours or seconds or lifetimes. Time in this space doesn't matter. The fire glows no brighter, no dimmer. It just stays holding shape without needing fuel. When you stand again, none of them stop you. You nod to each. Not goodbye, just respect. Empousa flickers once more before vanishing. Athena meets your gaze last. She does not apologize. She simply stays. And maybe that's enough. You step out of the circle. The world resumes. Light filters in through trees that weren't there a moment ago. A breeze moves again. Birds faint in the distance. You've reached a threshold, and you're not the same. Because the stories you carry now aren't just myths. They're people. People who were transformed not by gods or sorcery, but by what others needed them to represent. And by walking through those stories, you've begun to write them back. The air feels thinner now, not in an uncomfortable way, more like elevation, as if each story lifted you slightly higher until here, everything is just a little quieter, a little further from noise, from edits, from expectation. You walk along a ridge, narrow and winding. To your left, the sea again, silver and silent. To your right, a deep forest, layered and watching. You are above it all for the first time. And below you, in all directions, are the traces of the women you've met. Not bodies, not graves, echoes. There's a stone bench carved into the edge of the cliff. You sit not because you're tired, but because this is a place for sitting, for watching, for grieving. It's time. You look back not literally, but internally. And one by one the names rise. Scylla, Circe, Lamia, Medusa, Empousa, Ceto, Echidna, even Athena, all of them born into stories only to be twisted into weapons. You think about what was done to them, but now more than that, you think about what they could have been. Scylla, who might have been a sailor's guide rather than a reef's curse. Circe, a healer, revered instead of a witch, feared. Lamia, a mother who never lost her name to bedtime threats. Medusa, a priestess left to mourn in peace instead of murdered into legend. Empousa, the shapeshifter who didn't have to disappear to survive. Ceto, the sea herself, left unnamed instead of blamed. Echidna, the creator whose children were tools, not trials. Athena, the strategist, forced to play by someone else's rules. And for the first time you don't feel just sadness. You feel recognition. Because monsters never form in a vacuum. They form in response to power, to punishment, to silence. You rise from the bench and step to the cliff's edge. You feel no fear. You've seen worse in mirrors than in myth. And that's the realization, isn't it? They weren't monsters. They were mirrors. Reflections of everything the world didn't want to admit. That beauty can be cursed instead of celebrated. That rage can be justified. That grief doesn't always sound like crying. That power in the hands of women is always called something else. The world pointed at them and said monster because it didn't want to say witness. It didn't want to say survivor. It definitely didn't want to say truth teller. But now you've seen all of it. And there's one more truth still waiting. The real horror wasn't what they became. It was what was done to them. And the real miracle is that they endured anyway, in myth, in whisper, in symbol, in story, in women who wear eyeliner like war paint and teeth like ceremony, in anyone who's ever been rewritten and still managed to hold the pen. You close your eyes, and for a moment you hear them again, not screaming, breathing, the kind of breath that reshapes mountains, that reroutes rivers, that says simply, I'm still here. You open your eyes. The wind lifts. Below you the forest breathes. The sea pulses. The sky doesn't glow, but it listens. You begin walking again, and the path doesn't lead anywhere dramatic. No final boss, no burning temple, just more steps. Because the stories aren't done. They never were. They just need someone willing to carry them without twisting them. And tonight, that's you. The ridge path flattens now. Less dramatic, less symbolic. Just simple dirt and scattered stones, the kind of road you could almost forget if you weren't paying attention. The sky above is still that hush blue of early dawn, though no sun ever seems to rise here. The light comes from the stories now, from memory, from acknowledgement. You've passed through myth and fire and silence. But there's one more place to go, one more thread to pull. The earth tilts slightly downward, and ahead you see what looks like a grove, but not like the ones you've passed before. This one is tangled with wild vines, overgrown altars, and old offerings faded with time. It's not tended anymore. It hasn't been for centuries. It's a graveyard, not for bodies, for names. You step between cracked stone slabs. Some are engraved, most are blank. Others bear etchings in languages you don't recognize. Glyphs, spirals, burnt symbols, half scraped away. You crouch by one stone. There's a single word still visible, Arachne. And suddenly the ground shifts. No, not physically, just your understanding. Because of course she belongs here too. You stand slowly, and the web begins to form in your mind. She was the weaver who challenged Athena, the mortal girl who dared to be better than a goddess at the thing the goddess claimed as her domain. She wove a tapestry so perfect and so brutally truthful that it enraged Athena. She didn't die. She was transformed into a spider, not out of mercy, out of punishment. A reminder to others. Know your place. But what if that place was earned? What if Arachne's only sin was telling the truth beautifully? Historians still argue whether the myth is meant as a cautionary tale about pride or about censorship. Arachne didn't mock the gods. She depicted their crimes, their lies, their hypocrisies, and for that, she became something to be crushed underfoot. Another name rewritten into a creature. You move deeper into the grove. There are more names now, whispering from the moss. Callisto, transformed into a bear for being assaulted by Zeus. Io, turned into a cow and set to wander for eternity. Syrinx, transformed into reeds just to escape a chasing god. Daphne, become a tree. All of them changed to avoid violation, and still somehow they were blamed. You begin to see it clearly now. This was never about monsters. This was about power, managing fear through transformation. Change the woman, and you don't have to change the world. You kneel again, hand brushing another stone. There's no name, just a symbol, and high with a tear carved so shallow it's barely there. You know what it means. Some were never named at all. Some never made it into story. Just screams buried under temples. Just shadows mistaken for evil. Just silence that hardened into legend. You sit in the grass now, the grave markers around you, like quiet judges who finally stopped speaking, not because they ran out of words, but because they're letting you decide what to do with theirs. You could walk away, forget, let the old stories rot into the dirt, or you could write them again, not with swords or shame or fear, but with the full weight of what they lived, not what they were called, what they endured. You rise. Your body feels different now, not heavier, just carved. Like the myths etched into this place were drawn into your skin, not to mark you, but to remind you. These were never stories for sleep. They were warnings for the awake, but they were also love letters to women who refused to disappear, to monsters who never stopped being human, to girls told to be quiet, who whispered anyway. The grove lets you go gently. No wind, no parting message, just the sense that something has shifted behind you, healed just a little. And the path forward, it's clearer now, because even if no one else remembers them, you do. The path you follow now is soft, nearly silent, underfoot. No dramatic turns, no looming ruins. Just grass, just space. The grove of unnamed monuments lies behind you, and ahead, well, that's what you're here for. You're not heading toward one woman anymore. You're walking with all of them. The monsters, the misnamed, the mourned, the forgotten. They're not haunting you. They're with you. You feel it in your shoulders lighter. You feel it in your steps steadier. Because once you've seen the rewrite, once you've stood in the echo chamber of their grief and their clarity and their forced transformation, you can't unknow it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe knowing is the start. The trees part slowly, not dramatically, just enough to let you through. And now you're standing at a crossroads. No signs, no markers, no divine messengers pointing a sword or a curse or a prophecy. Just two paths. The one to your right is polished easy, wide, familiar, the path of heroes, of gods, of stories that end with lessons stamped in marble and a victorious male name carved across the top. The path to your left is overgrown, not ugly, just real, twisting, rooted, covered in vines and broken mirrors and pieces of thread someone once tried to cut and gave up halfway. You look down, both, and for once there is no warning, no whisper of fate, no booming voice telling you which way will make you a monster. Because now you know. The monster is never what you are. It's what they call you when you refuse to obey the story. You step toward the left path, and the wind shifts just slightly, like it's nodding in approval. The trees arch overhead, like witnesses, not watchers, not judges, just tall, tired women who've seen enough to know that anyone still walking deserves the benefit of the doubt. You keep going. The path doesn't smooth out, but it feels right. And as you walk, their names return like gentle taps on the shoulder. Scylla, Medusa, Circe, Lamia, Empousa, Ceto, Arachne, Daphne, Io. Not asking for anything, just reminding you. You reach the crest of a hill, and below you the world stretches wide. It looks different now, not because it's changed, because you have. You see the gaps where stories were taken. You see the wounds hidden in praise. You see the monsters standing still quiet, waiting to be listened to instead of slain. And you see the girls behind them blinking slowly, wondering if this time they'll be allowed to finish their sentence. You sit down at the hilltop, you take a deep breath, and you start to write, not to fix, not to rewrite, to remember, to offer space, to turn the mirror back on history and say, here, look again. And just as you place your hand on the ground beside you, one last whisper. We weren't the monsters. We were the mirrors. And now we see you too. Let's stay here a while. Let the myths settle. Let the names settle. Let the silence wrap around your shoulders like something warm and deserved. You've heard a lot tonight, traveled far, not in distance, but in understanding. Maybe more than you expected when you pressed play. You met monsters who were never monsters. You watched grief get mislabeled power, get punished, and survival get twisted into story. You didn't flinch. You listened. That matters. The women you walked beside weren't here to haunt you. They were here to remind you that you're allowed to question what you've been told, that you can sit with contradiction, that some things become clearer after the story ends. So now, just rest. You don't have to remember every name. You don't have to fix every myth. You were here, you heard them, and that's enough. Let your breath slow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders fall softly, gently into the quiet. It's safe now. The monsters have left the room, or maybe they never needed to. Maybe they just needed someone to say, I see you. And now you've said it. So sleep if you can. You've earned it. We'll be here when you wake.